You can look at crypto in many ways as no different than like early stage companies. You ultimately have a bunch of early stage networks that are trying to develop, and some of them have a bunch of potential.
Polygon has launched the private stablecoin payments using zero-knowledge proofs to hide senders, receivers.
Yeah, to me, the most important thing is choice.
This episode is brought to you by iTrust Capital. iTrust Capital allows you to invest in crypto as well as precious metals like gold and silver via an IRA. And this gives you huge tax advantages. So you can invest in over 90 crypto assets, including Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP, Solana, and many more. You also get access to stablecoins such as Circle's USDC and Ripple's RLUSD. And as it relates to precious metals, you can invest in gold and silver, and these are the physical assets. So you're not investing in paper gold and silver. So on this platform, you can redeem the gold and silver if you choose to, and not many platforms offer that. Now, the big advantage to investing via iTrust Capital's IRA is the huge tax advantages. Many of you know you incur capital gains taxes when you sell at a gain. Well, you can minimize the effect of some of that by doing it via an IRA, especially if you have a long-term view on crypto as well as precious metals. And you can buy and sell crypto and precious metals 24/7. It's low cost and no monthly fee. So this is a great option to get exposure to these two great asset classes. And in addition, they have a great custody solution. It's called Premium Custody Account. So it uses institutional grade crypto custody, such as Coinbase Prime, which BlackRock leverages. iTrust also uses Fidelity Digital Assets as well as Fireblocks, and it's a closed loop system. So if someone hacks into your account, they can't withdraw funds. I believe this is the second safest way to custody your assets, right behind self-custody, where you control the private keys. And within the custody account, you could buy and sell 24/7. It's low fees. So this is a great option for custody of your assets, and you can sleep at night knowing that you're getting the institutional grade custodial services. So once again, two great products here from iTrust Capital, the IRA, where you can roll over your existing 401k or IRA to iTrust Capital's version, getting the huge tax advantages, and the institutional custody. And folks, if you sign up with my link at itrustcapital.com/go/thinkingcrypto, you could get a $100 funding bonus. I have an account with iTrust Capital, so I encourage you to go check out iTrust Capital, learn about their services, and see if it's right for you. Again, you can get a $100 funding bonus by signing up via my link, which is itrustcapital.com/go/thinkingcrypto. Link will be in the description. Hi, everyone. Welcome into the Thinking Crypto podcast. I'm your host, Tony Edward.
And I'm Amanda Whitcroft.
And joining us today is Marc Boiron, who is the CEO of Polygon Labs, which is a global leader in software development, driving the advancement of the Polygon and Ag layer ecosystems. Marc, great to have you.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, Marc, lots of exciting news happening in the Polygon ecosystem. So lots to dive into. We're excited for this conversation. Let's kick it off with your background. Tell us about where you're from, how'd you get into crypto, and much more.
So by background, I'm a lawyer. I originally wanted to go into investment banking and then realized that was actually more boring than I thought it was. And decided to go into the second most boring thing I could find, which was being a lawyer. And so I went and did that for a few years when I was an M&A securities lawyer. But ultimately decided that if you actually want to be successful, you probably need to go into an area, A, that you enjoy, and B, where there's going to be massive growth. And so back in late 2016, started looking at, getting into crypto a little bit more. I'd been studying Ethereum for a long time, loved it, fell down the rabbit hole like everybody ended up doing, and decided to jump into that. And so early 2017 till about 3 years ago, spent all my time on the legal side of things in crypto. I think the interesting thing about that when you're a lawyer is that if you're going to do a good job in crypto, you need to actually really understand products, right? So I got a chance to work to be kind of like the first real outside counsel for like Compound and Uniswap and most of the DeFi protocols, probably 90 or 100 DeFi protocols back in basically 2019 to 2021. The thing when you do that is you end up actually getting to understand those products deeply. Then when you end up understanding like 2 or 3 kind of like DeFi primitives deeply, you pretty much understand all of them. And that gave me like really good insights into I think what you actually need to build something kind of successful in DeFi, working with those teams. So I ended up going to DYDX, working with the team over there as their chief legal officer. And then after some time, just really looking for a new challenge, and decided to come into a bigger ecosystem in Polygon, first as chief legal officer and now as the CEO. And it's definitely been much more interesting with a lot of opportunities ahead of us. So it's been a fun ride.
Mark, I imagine coming from a legal background now into crypto leadership is what an invaluable background to have during this time. And I'm sure you're no stranger to technology moving faster than any sort of legislation right now. But I would just love to know, especially given, I guess, 'tis the season for a lot of these hacks that, have recently happened. KelpDAO comes to mind. Has that, I'm sure it's given you a different lens on regulation, but in your opinion, what does responsible innovation actually look like?
Yeah, I love this question. So I think one of the things that's been frankly really disappointing with the space over the last, 9 years has been this movement away from I'll call it decentralization and frankly caring about security to just more and more centralization, which, that's okay. Like, you could create some better experiences if you keep some things decentralized and some things centralized. But what has happened with that move is let's move towards centralization and let's not take on any of the responsibilities that centralization actually requires, which means significantly more investment in security. And it's just been disappointing. So, on the Polygon side, I think probably it was about 4 years ago that we hired who's now our CTO, but who was our CISO, Mubit. And we were very obsessed with security from day one. I think people who come into Polygon, one of the things they're most surprised about is their setup from an IT perspective. They're just what is going on? And really it's because when you think about all the vectors of attack, what most people in crypto don't realize is they're not Web3 attack vectors. They're just your typical Web2 attack vectors that nobody actually pays attention to. And when you actually have good security in-house and take it seriously, you're going to take the Web2 security very, very seriously, which is going to translate into good actual Web3 security in many ways. And so I think there's this Web2 security thing has just been skipped. And the reason it was skipped is because it used to be all about decentralization. And so if one person didn't care about security, it didn't matter because maybe you had 10 others who actually did. But as you move towards something more centralized, you have to start taking that seriously. And just nobody's really done that very well, I think. And it's something the industry really needs to reevaluate. And I think we're seeing that, frankly, in real time right now.
Pardon the interruption. Hi, I'm Tony. I'm the host of the Thinking Crypto podcast. I wanted to ask you if you can please support the podcast by hitting the like button, subscribing if you haven't as yet. You can leave a comment below as well. And if you're listening on a podcast platform such as Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts, please be sure to follow and hit the 5-star rating. I'll let you get back to the content. Thank you so much. So Mark, to that point, how far away are we where we have less of these hacks and exploits? Is it, to your point, Web 2 companies transitioning more to Web 3, maybe the introduction of AI to help, fill the gaps, so to speak, of security, and they can run 24/7, educating more consumers and investors, and maybe in 5 years, maybe Mark, that we are there where security is better and less exploits?
I mean, look, I think we first need to baseline on the reality of look how many exploits happen in Web 2, right? There's a new exploit in terms of some hack that gets access to some form of customer information. Basically, I'm sure it's on a weekly basis. We hear about it probably on a bi-weekly basis, but they're probably on a daily basis. These are happening. It's very hard to keep systems secure in a perfect way. So I don't think we're going to solve this fully. But what we are dealing with that's slightly different, or very different, is actual money that gets impacted by these. It's not just data. Both of them are serious, but money's on a completely different level, right? And so I think we do need to double down on what those efforts look like. Knowing that we're not going to solve them, we need to build systems with that understanding. To me, that's the first important part is hey, we know that there's going to be exploits at times, so let's build systems that are resilient to that. But I think the second thing is that when those exploits actually happen, what do you actually do about it? And I think that as an industry, I think we need to do a better job of reacting to those. So We have like the SEAL team that's pretty good there. I think like stablecoin issuers need to like take that pretty seriously when they have like the ability to freeze things. They probably should. But ultimately, like I don't think we're going to actually solve this entirely at all. I think like AI, frankly, makes this worse, not better.
Yeah.
So I can tell you, like our security team uses. I'm very obsessed with AI, so our whole team is like very AI centric. But like I would say that our security team was the first one to start like heavily using AI and like constantly have multiple agents running and like working on trying to like penetrate our systems and trying to like harden our systems. But the reality is that we might have a 10-person security team working on this. But ultimately you are talking about people, right? So like, if you think about like what the flow is, I think this part's like something people don't appreciate very much. Like, how is it that like AI agents are actually going to be like testing your systems and trying to like find bugs and penetrate them? And the answer is based off of human prompts, right? Like, and you could still get like agents to write prompts for other agents, but ultimately there's a human who wrote that first prompt. So ultimately, like your security is still based off of how well can those prompts be written to go ahead and test your systems. But the thing is, then check like how many there are outside. So you might have like a 10-person security team writing these prompts, but you still have a million other hackers writing these prompts that have access to the same tools. So like we've actually seen like bug reports go up like, it's something like 5x from what they used to be. And this is why we use significantly more AI internally. We've paid out more bug bounties than we've ever paid out before. And the simple reason is everyone else has access to these tools as well and are really trying to like penetrate your systems equally. And so I think AI makes it worse, even though they help you. And they're going to help harden, I think, the entire internet. And until we get to a point where everything is more hardened, AI just means more ability to attack existing systems.
Speaking of the existing systems, we hear decentralized, DeFi, decentralized. This is we hear this jargon consistently. And what I hear with the solutions, as far as the evolution is concerned of solving these issues we're talking about, it does kind of require centralized entities in order to unlock certain things. So do you think, especially since we're converging with TradFi, I mean, do you think that is really part of where we need to go? I mean, the reason TradFi has such legitimacy is they have the compliance, they have the regulations. Are we going to see a world where we're completely decentralized, or do we have to have a bit of centralized to come in order to really solve this issue?
I think we need to like recognize why decentralization is valuable and where it is valuable and ensure that we maintain decentralization where it matters, but then not lean into decentralization where it doesn't matter, right? And like easy examples of this that you could take on one extreme is like a blockchain, right? So you've got like a layer one, like that should be a decentralized blockchain. The second that you start actually introducing like real centralization, you're no different than any other network. And then like, why does it even exist? And so I think that's like one point where like decentralization makes a lot of sense. On the other hand, you've got, I don't know, a on-chain version of some stock. Decentralization makes no sense in that context. Like that stock is centralized, whether you want it to be or not. It is going to be centralized. It's just the reality. And so you should deal with it in a centralized way, right? And then there's a whole bunch of other things that are like within, a spectrum there that we need to like actually recognize where it is on that spectrum and treat it that way. I think the thing that we've done probably poorly as an industry is saying like, okay, we've got these things that are maximally decentralized. And from how they should be treated from a regulatory perspective, from a security perspective, is very, very different than existing systems. There's no doubt about that. But then you've got these things that like move over that centralization spectrum, and they might not be like a stock, but they're somewhere further over. But we try to act as if they're still just as decentralized as like any other blockchain. And I don't think that actually serves us in any way. I think to your point, Amanda, like when we start getting to the point where you've got degrees of centralization in there, you start needing to introduce certain factors that actually deal with that. Again, it's Some of that is what the companies actually do from a security perspective, from a trust building perspective. Some of it is from a regulatory perspective. We need to recognize that like those points of centralization do create risks that don't exist. And we should, with the decentralized systems, and we shouldn't treat them the same way. And so like, let's keep the things that really need to be decentralized, like decentralized. And the things that are centralized, let's just recognize that and treat them like any other centralized systems and regulate them in that way. And, have security built out that way and have teams built out in the same ways you do with any other centralized system.
Marc, with your plethora of experience in legal and understanding the nature of the blockchain and crypto world as it relates to regulations, where do you think we're at, as far as regulating DeFi? I know the Clarity Act still stalled in the Senate right now. Do you think that has enough to regulate DeFi? And are you happy essentially with where we're at and the standards of that's in that bill?
Yeah, I think DeFi is the hardest thing to deal with, I'd argue, in like all of crypto when it comes to like how to regulate it. And it's because of the exact point that Amanda and I were chatting about, which is like these degrees of decentralization, right? Like, I think that when you look at a DEX, or let's just say like the way a DEX could be built, the way a DEX should be built. Let's take like Uniswap V2, V3, right? Like the actual user experience, the money, like the actual like core exchange experience is completely decentralized to the same degree as like a blockchain is decentralized. And like that should have completely different levels of regulation than what a centralized exchange would have. They're completely different products, completely different risks. Like everything needs to be looked at from scratch differently. I don't think that is being done well enough anywhere by anyone. And I think the reason is because there's a second category, which is those where that is not true, right? And so like, let's take any lending protocol as an example. There's a lot of lending protocols in DeFi that are like better than typical lending. Like there's no doubt about that. But like what we shouldn't ignore is that lending protocols do have some degree of centralization that it doesn't exist within DEX, right? Specifically, like there are actual human choices being made around what collateral looks like, what collateral ratios look like, what gets accepted in the system, what doesn't. I think CalcDAO is a great example. Like this whole issue is a great example of that. And so we should recognize that there is a human judgment being made there, and those actually need to be addressed. So I think like that makes it really, really hard. There shouldn't be a DeFi bill or a DeFi regulation. There should be regulating specific activity in DeFi that actually exists where it needs to be regulated, and not regulating activity that doesn't need to be regulated. And even where activity does need to be regulated, it's what activity needs to be regulated. It's definitely not the same as typical lending, right? Like there's completely different decisions being made, or lack of decisions being made around like what, interest rates are going to be, for example. And that's something that like we need regulators to actually address. And I don't think regulators are understanding.
So Marc, I definitely want to jump to Polygon because there's a lot happening, some incredible news over the past couple of weeks. But before we get there, let's set the table. For those who don't know about Polygon, tell us about the blockchain and Polygon Labs.
Yeah. So Polygon's been around since 2018. And when you think of like the background of Polygon, I think it's a super cool story, right? Because at the time you had Ethereum that had super high gas fees, was relatively slow, and you had other chains trying to like take over kind of like the EVM world. And Polygon comes around with this super practical solution of just a very fast and cheap chain. And you start seeing every activity moving over to Polygon in, the 2021 era. Massive growth. And what happens in every industry when that happens is that everybody starts coming up with solutions that compete with you, right? And so at that point in time, you start seeing every single fast, cheap chain that you could possibly imagine coming out, and you're still seeing them coming out. And one of the things that I think Polygon did at that time that was, I think, relatively controversial actually was, hey, we've done a great job in DeFi. Let's go after kind of the off-chain world and start bringing in a lot of enterprises so that we can get like real world adoption. Because at the core, like the thing that we care about Polygon is like, yes, there is a kind of like crypto native use case here that is like very relevant that like we want to serve, but there's a whole world outside of that. And if you were to like keep the crypto space to like just this tiny use case, it wouldn't actually end up being incredibly valuable to a lot of people. You need to find a way to bring it to a lot more people. And so I think we started doing that like really successfully in like 2022, 2023, bringing like the Starbucks and the Nikes and the Reddits and the Disneys, and you can keep going on in the kind of Fortune 50 that came on chain on Polygon. And then FTX happened, and it basically destroyed everything that enterprises were doing. And they basically said like, hey, we're going to basically drop everything because we can't trust kind of this industry at all. So for Polygon, that was like actually a real step back in the sense that, we had all of this traction with enterprises. But the interesting thing that it did do was that it built a massive reputation for Polygon in like the enterprise and institutional world that has come back in like a massive way, like recently, right? And so what we did at that time was we went back and said, okay, let's go rebuild, like, where's the next phase of like mass adoption going to be? And what we saw was that as we kind of brought these enterprises online, what it had started opening the doors was a lot of conversations with these enterprises and institutions around some other use cases, right? They were exploring like NFT use cases and like very consumer oriented use cases. But it opened the door to like payments related use cases and RWA use cases that we started being able to have. And as we kind of like fast forward from there, we started exploring like, where is it that we have really like massive traction? And there was definitely like the interesting still like DeFi component. But for us, when we thought about like, okay, where are we going to bring the masses? It was really payments. And so about like 18 months ago, most people didn't realize at the time was we started reorienting like what Polygon does to very much a payments use case. That 6 months ago is when we went into that like started focusing really only on that use case, made 2 massive acquisitions so that we could build out, we call the open money stack, which is kind of like a fully integrated solution so that you can launch stablecoins in like, 6 to 8 months, 6 to 8 weeks instead of like, 12 to 18 months. And that's really when I think people started recognizing like, oh, Polygon's actually really focused on payments. And so, that's really where we're focused at Polygon Labs. That is entirely where we spend our time. It's like, how do we bring more payments use cases to Polygon? And ultimately what we're seeing, as we can see from recent news, is that like a lot of enterprises from obviously like the Metas and then the Visas and, modern treasuries of the world, are ready to start bringing kind of stablecoins into their core products. This is like really nice to see, by the way, because it doesn't feel exploratory, right? So when I think of what we did in 2021 and 2022, the cool thing about it was it introduced enterprises, but to like the on-chain world. But it's exploratory in the sense that they didn't know exactly what they were going to end up doing. They knew that there was value here, but they were exploring what that was going to look like. Whereas now they actually know what their use cases are. And that's something that's like very nice to see, because all that means is just continued growth with those companies that you're working with into the various use case, into the various like growth of the use case that they have, which is payments.
I'm sure Meta had shared empathy with you just with the launch of Libra and the what happened there, where it's they were early, but the government didn't really want them to do that, viewing it as kind of a private global currency that Mark Zuckerberg was creating. So congrats to you on pivoting and building back in the enterprise sector. Talk to us about, and congratulations, this is more recent news as of today. Polygon has launched the private stablecoin payments using zero knowledge proofs to hide senders, receivers. And so it's interesting because the ethos of blockchain, when I first started 8 years ago, was all about transparency and public, and now it's really, even with Zcash now and the threat of quantum computing, now we're all getting behind this narrative of privacy. So talk to us about this.
Yeah, to me, the most important thing is choice, right? So like, let's take Venmo, I think is such a great example of this, where like, I think the first time that I saw Venmo with the feature of like, I can let the entire world know who I'm paying and why I'm paying, I thought that was like the most insane idea ever. And I never have ever sent a Venmo payment turning on like the public feature for everybody to see. But in crypto, for some reason, we were very big advocates of this from day one. Now, I think there's different reasons why we were advocates of this. One is it does open up some opportunities that don't exist otherwise. And that's like a great thing, both from a regulatory perspective, but also just from like a use case perspective, from a verification perspective. Like, and that's like really nice. But that shouldn't be the only use case, just like it's not the only use case on Venmo and in the traditional world. You should be able to send money privately. You can send money privately today, and most of that's going to be via, face-to-face cash transactions. And you should be able to do that. Or if it's not private, at a minimum, the entire world should have to see it. It should be like one party that has to see it, right? And so like when we think about this on the Polygon side, one thing that's been nice is like we have had a privacy solution on Polygon for a long time, Railgun. Railgun is one of the earliest privacy solutions launched on Polygon in 2022. It's been available there for anyone who wants privacy. Nice option. What we've done working with our partner Hinkle is we've actually added a second privacy solution. And this is one that's much more integrated into our wallet solution that we recently acquired. And the whole idea here is we know that there is a certain set of users, and specifically in this case, a set of enterprises who want to offer that privacy. And we should have a solution that is easy for them to use to do that. In this case, they can easily just use the Polygon wallet and offer immediately like very integrated private payments and be able to like actually hide information that they want to hide. Important thing about this solution is it also has the ability to share information with regulators from a compliance perspective when you want to. And I think this is like important in the sense that, again, when you think of like most payment solutions today, yes, cash is completely private. And again, there are completely private solutions on Polygon if you want to use them. But most of those like private payments that you're really thinking about, again, they're not private. They're private from the world, but somebody still has that information. And the solution that we just launched is the exact same thing. Is there is the ability to get that information. It's just the whole world is not going to see every single one of your payments. And that's what when we think of like payments use cases that like enterprises and institutions want to offer, that's really what they care about. They're not saying, I don't want to see the payments. I just want to be able to have the world not see them and then share the details when I have to share those details with regulators or a private party for litigation purposes or whatever else that might be.
Yeah, Mark, that definitely makes sense. And I've seen a lot of institutional folks talk about the need for privacy for certain transactions, especially if it's proprietary information, they're making certain payments to a specific vendor or manufacturer, or whatever it may be. They certainly want to have that level of privacy to make sure their competitors are not seeing it, or certain folks who may be trying to follow their every step for whatever reason, they're not able to see that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the nice thing about this solution that we actually just released is the fact that you're able to toggle this on and off, right? So you can choose whether you want a solution to be private and a payment to be private. And when you want it to be private, you'll just click, shielded transaction and you'll have your transaction be shielded. And when you don't want it to be private, then you just won't shield it. And that to me is the type of optionality that you should have. And that doesn't change the fact that ultimately you're on a public blockchain. You're just choosing to have certain payments that are not and that meet the needs that those payments users have.
So, Mark, in addition to this stablecoin use case, which is huge, right? Stablecoins are dominating right now as far as many of the transactions happening on chain. Are there tokenization items happening as well? Are folks tokenizing on Polygon?
Yeah. So I think we've had over 500 projects tokenized or 500 assets tokenized on Polygon. It's been one of the early chains where tokenization became a big thing. From our perspective, we view tokenization as like super important for a few purposes. Like the biggest one is when we think of like the Polygon mission, it's very much like move all money on chain, right? So the whole idea here is when I think of like the next 10 to 15 years, in like confident that in 15 years from now, any payment that you make in any app that you're using is going to be a payment on chain. You won't necessarily know it. People won't be paying attention, but yeah, you'll be paying on chain. And we could talk through like why that would happen, but it will be. But for that to happen, one of the things that's incredibly important is you need to be able to use your money on chain, right? And so like 15 years from now, that's easy. Every merchant is going to accept payments on chain. They're not going to know it either. And like, that's fine. But to make that actually happen, to bring that to reality, you have to make it easy to move that, to use that money on chain. So when you think of like, what are the use cases for money? They're sit there passively and do nothing with them. And so that's important to have a wallet infrastructure that can support that, which is part of the reason why we acquired wallet infrastructure to do that. People want to be able to earn yield on their money. And so it's very important to have DeFi kind of like yielding products that you can make available, arguably even off-chain solutions that then pay you in on-chain yield. And then third is you need the ability to invest in products, right? So like your typical investments that you make, people want to hold stocks, they want to hold funds, they want to hold money market funds. Like there's lots of assets that people want to hold. You need to make those assets available on chain, right? That's where I think like tokenized assets end up being really, really important. If you don't do that, then what you're forcing users to do is take their on-chain money, convert it off-chain, typically with a fee associated with it, go invest in a less efficient product. And then when they want to come on-chain, they need to ramp on-chain again, where there's typically a fee, and then use it. Like we have to avoid that experience, right? And the best way to avoid that is tokenized assets. So that's something that's been like really, really important to us for a long time. And it continues to be like an incredibly like core part of like making payments stay on chain and like moving money off chain is having those tokenized assets available that you can invest in and never move your money off chain for.
With all money that will be on chain within a few years, what's the first domino to fall in your opinion? Is it treasury management, bank deposits?
Yeah, it's a good question. I just go to pain points. Like, where is it that there is pain right now? And we're so focused on cross-border money movement because that is where the pain is, right? I give the example often that like, I'll go to dinner with friends and we might want to split a bill and we could be in, in New York City and somebody will ask me to send them some USDC and I'll like just say, no, I'm going to shoot you. Like I'll use Venmo. Like that's just easier. But when I have the same experience where, I'm talking to a family member in Canada or in France and they ask me to send them money, I like beg to send them stablecoins. I'm like, please let me send you stablecoins. It's way easier. I don't want to figure out how to send you the money and what fees are involved. Like it's super complicated. And that to me is the truth when you're sending money anywhere in the world. And it's also the truth when you're in developing countries and you want to send money in many cases within that country. I was in Argentina at the end of last year and it was shockingly complex to pay people if you were not paying them in cash. It was not easy. And if you had stablecoins, you would be able to solve that problem. And so to me, it's solving those problems. So step number one is solving cross-border money movement. Let's make that like incredibly easy for folks. Then I think step number two is going to be how you actually extend that to others, right? So you've got cross-border money movement for, I think, businesses who are trying to pay out consumers or receive money from consumers or pay each other. Step number two is then enterprises using their own, like for internal purposes, like money for treasury movement purposes. And the only reason that's number two, by the way, because step number one should be you go to a company and you say, hey, you've got money all over the world. It'd be easier for you to consolidate it like on chain. And they'd be like, well, yeah, I control that entire experience. Like, let me do it. But the difference is you're dealing with, CFOs at that point in time, instead of dealing with like business folks who want to make money. So the CFOs are going to take like 2 years longer to actually come on chain, even though technically it's way easier than the business folks who are like, I can make money if I do this or save money. And so I'm going to go do it immediately. So I kind of see like first domino is just like cross-border money movement where you're actually generating revenue or reducing fees by doing it. And then second is just your internal money movement becomes like the next most important thing. And I think the third one that most people don't think about enough is tokenized deposits. Right. So like we talk very much on like the stablecoin side nonstop, but the reality is like most money currently sits in banks. And if you think banks are going to allow money to like, we can obviously see it with like the Clarity Act kind of negotiations right now. If you think they're going to easily just let money flow out of their deposits into another asset, like you're living in another world, they're going to figure out how to keep that. And even if they win this whole, which they kind of like call it FAF one, the whole yield argument in the Clarity Act, they're still dealing with the fact that there's now a 10x better form of money in stablecoins, even if you can't earn yield on it. And they need to do something about that. And the something is tokenized deposits, right? And so like, I think you're going to see just a massive number of tokenized deposits efforts in the next like year. and then see them actually becoming like very real in like 2 to 3 years from now, to a point where, to me, in like 5 years, like any major bank is going to have their assets tokenized. I think, like I say any major bank because you've got community banks who deal with like farmers in the middle of like Missouri, and like I'm confident they will not have tokenized deposits in like 5 years from now. But pretty much anyone else will. And then you get really interesting dynamics between stablecoins and those tokenized deposits, because you have to be able to like just easily, now you have the same forms of money. They do two different things, but you have the same forms of money. And now you have the ability to easily move it from just like one blockchain, presumably, that you'll have tokenized deposits on, or a series of blockchains of tokenized deposits, and be able to easily exchange them through interop solutions for stablecoins, which is part of the reason why we spend a lot of time on interop solutions at Polygon, because like there's going to be many blockchains and you're going to need to be able to move that money seamlessly. So I think that's like the next thing that ends up kind of like falling after you solve the initial kind of stablecoin issues.
A follow-up question to that, and you articulated it so well. So with banks having the tokenized deposits, do you think they will still launch their own stablecoins, or they may use the stablecoins already in the market that are established, like USDT or USDC and things along those lines?
Yes, I think there's some, you will see it, right? Like I think we've got SoFi USD already as an example of a stable coin out there. So I think there's no doubt that you're going to see them. I think the question ends up being, are they necessary if you can tokenize deposits? And I think the answer ends up being yes, which is why you're going to end up seeing more of them, because again, they serve different purposes, right? Like one of them is just a depository instrument. It's just, the money in the bank. It's the preferred type of asset for a bank, right? Because if you compare that to stablecoins, you actually earn more on those bank deposits than you will earn on like the stablecoins. But you know that money is going to need to move out of the deposit form into another form. You now have an opportunity to continue to actually offer your asset as the asset that you could have, right? So you could very much see a bank saying, hey, you've got my tokenized deposit here. But by the way, when you want to leave kind of our deposit ecosystem, I've got this stable coin that I can offer you that you can then use anywhere else, right? That is going to be like too tempting for banks for them to not like want to do that. Now, does that actually make a lot of sense? I think maybe early on for banks who can kind of like get adoption of their stable coins before there's even more than they are now. But at a certain point, I think what most banks start recognizing is there are, and this is already very true of Tether and certain like for USDT and USDC, is there end up being network effects around this money and where they're used and how they're used. And at a certain point, it probably won't make sense anymore to try to actually replicate that because you just won't do it successfully. So I think there's like this window of time for banks to like potentially introduce stablecoins before they just need to default to like, we are going to use tokenized deposits and nothing else and just rely on existing stablecoins.
It's no wonder they're fighting hard right now, Mark, with the stablecoin yield situation and trying to relitigate the Genius Act.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is like, I'm a firm believer that like the entire plumbing of our money movement system is just going to get ripped apart over the next like 5 years. And when that happens and you're part of those whose plumbing is going to get ripped apart, you start trying to figure out what you can do about that, right? Because the plumbing that's going to replace it is going to be blockchains. And so the question just becomes then, how do you put yourself in the middle of that, right? And so some are, going to create their own chains and try to like leverage it from that method and become that way of moving money. And others are going to focus on like the assets, but everybody needs to do something. Those who are just sitting around, to me, is like the most mind-boggling thing, because you're about to get like ripped apart over the next 5 years and you're just sitting and watching. It feels like it's not an option to just sit around and watch.
I think asset managers are sitting pretty, but otherwise, yeah. Just pivoting a bit, Mark, what is the future of Ethereum layer 2? So Polygon, in context of Vitalik, came out, and I think it was beginning of February in a CoinDesk article, questioning whether Ethereum still needs a dedicated layer 2 roadmap. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think he completely nailed it, right? Because I think what most people focused on was like the headline, and they never like actually like read his post in detail. when you read his post in detail, he says what we've been saying for a few years now, which is like general purpose chains. I wouldn't even say altcoins. General purpose chains are dead. There's no point in having a general purpose chain. Like you already have so many general purpose chains that exist. So like, what is a general purpose chain competing on? You're trying to be faster. You're not going to get faster like anymore. Like everybody's fast. Are you going to get cheaper? Like, no, everybody's cheap. But are you going to get more secure? Arguably, that's an interesting kind of proposition for Bitcoin and Ethereum, probably the only ones that's an interesting proposition for. And that's about it. And so to us, like the idea of general purpose chains don't make sense. You have to be something for some purpose. So Ethereum, I actually view it as like, which is maybe the one area I disagree with Vitalik on. I view it as like the security layer for blockchains that want to be able to actually have any form of like smart contracts on them and anything like that. Can't really do it in a good way on Bitcoin, right? And so in that way, I think Ethereum has this really key role, and arguably even it's a key role that it provides security for like assets and liquidity, right? So you could have like the liquidity that actually sits on Ethereum as well. But then when you actually say, like, let's talk about like using that money, it doesn't make sense to actually use that money on Ethereum. It's too expensive. It's too slow. And even the best efforts that Ethereum will go through, if you actually want to keep it secure, you're going to have to give up some of that speed and cost, or cost savings. And that's where like the layer twos end up making sense. But they don't make sense to just do everything, which is exactly what Vitalik said. Like, we don't need a chain that just does everything. It makes sense to do specific things that you actually want to do. It makes sense to just offer DeFi yield in a better way. It makes sense to offer DePIN with specific tooling around it and block space built for it, or in Polygon space. It makes sense for payments. We can build things from payments perspective that like you wouldn't care to build on a general purpose chain. And if you did care to build it, you wouldn't meet users' needs when you want to meet user needs, because you also need to build for 10 other use cases at the same time. So long way of saying, totally agree with Vitalik. General purpose L2s make no sense whatsoever. General purpose chains in general pretty much make no sense whatsoever. You should be built for a specific use case, including L2s, or frankly, any other L1 that launches now. It'd be crazy. And you're seeing this better happening. Like Solana, like, it talks about itself like it's just a general purpose L1. But if you actually look at it, what does it say? Internet capital markets. They're just a trading shop. Like that's what it's focused on. You go and you look at like, I don't know, like Monad. It's, supposed to be like a general purpose L1. I think they've pretty clearly pivoted to mostly focusing on like payments. You think of like Canton. Okay, arguably, whether it's a blockchain, what it looks like, let's leave all that aside. Basically an RWA focused chain, right? So like even the L1s are all going to become specific. And that to me is what Vitalik frankly just got wrong. And I've shared it with this team. It's like he made it sound like an L2 thing that like created all this fun, but in reality, it's just a blockchain thing. Blockchain block space is worthless unless you specialize it. That's really the story, and that's the important part of it. And that's like what we realized 2 years ago, and why we built, incubated, projects like Maiden, that is just a pure privacy focused L2, does nothing else. We incubated Katana, does pure like DeFi focused work, nothing else. And why we have Polygon that does just payments related work. So strongly agree with the thesis. Think the way it was presented wasn't really actually fully accurate.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. To your point of Ethereum being that base layer, I'm seeing institutions are building their own layer twos on top of Ethereum. An example would be Sony with Sonium. So it seems there's going to be swim lanes specifically for certain blockchains. And I love what Polygon's doing. I look at RWA.xyz. I see you guys in the top 10 with volume and tokenized assets and much more. So really, really great work on your end.
Yeah, we actually, we have a solution called Polygon CDK, which is intended for the ability to spin up your own blockchain, just like Sonium has done. So we announced, I think, a T-Rex chain was announced recently, which is like backed by the Apex Group, which has $3 billion of assets. You can very much view that as like an RWA focused chain, working very closely with several banks to launch their own blockchains right now. We're very, very big believers in this idea of like, you will have blockchains for specific use cases. And like, when we think of like our open money stack and the whole thesis behind it, we often talk about the idea that like, okay, yes, you need to have like interoperability as part of it. So you're going to have any change. You need to be able to offer wallets for those. You need to be able to have ramps. But at the bottom of it, we actually talked about this idea of like shared block space and dedicated block space, right? So the shared block space is like you can share block space with, on Polygon or on any other chain, but you should also be able to spin up your own block space if you need it, because there are a lot of reasons why you should have your own chain in specific situations. And so that's why we have a solution that specifically helps to do that. And we're definitely seeing like a lot of interest from banks are definitely a big one, but institutions more broadly.
So, Marc, when you look back in history, or when folks look back in history, I should say, what do you want Polygon's chapter to be? As far as Polygon was successful in doing A or B.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, like every decade in money has had somebody who has emerged and became like the key player in money movement, right? I think when you think of the 2010s, it was Stripe. I think when you think of like the 2020s, you should think about like Polygon. And it's really the key is Polygon was what enabled money to move on chain and made it easy to move on chain, right? And ultimately, when you go to 2040 and you look back at Polygon and you see that all money is on chain, what you're going to look at, you're going to look at the open money stack and the ability to integrate stablecoins in your enterprise, in your fintech, your neobank, in your bank, within a couple months as being the reason why we were able to accelerate the pace of like stablecoin and tokenized deposits to a point where everything ends up being moved on chain and builds what ends up being like the biggest money movement network in the world. That much of that's going to exist on Polygon the chain. And a lot of that's going to exist on, Polygon the chain with all of the networks that are interconnected with it, not just on the chain itself.
I want to talk about the crypto market more broadly. Do you think crypto will come out of the bear market this year?
Man, I've learned over the last 9 years to never try to guess what crypto is going to do. It's impossible. I think, look, I think you can look at crypto in many ways as no different than like early stage companies. Right? Like you ultimately have a bunch of early stage networks that are trying to develop. And some of them have a bunch of potential. And as a result of that, folks are willing to put a lot of value on it and buy tokens as a result of it. I think the reality that people are seeing is that you're probably not going to have like 500 different networks that are going to be incredibly valuable. And as a result of those, like most of those are going to go to zero. Right? It's just the reality of it. And that all of the applications that are shown in the form of tokens, most of those are going to fail because most applications in the world fail. And those are going to go to zero. And I think that we saw this, and I don't think it's any different. We saw in 2017, you have like all of these ICOs for the wackiest ideas. Like most of them just went to zero and completely failed and faded into the dark, just like most companies that start do. And now you've got the exact same thing happen. And so most are going to fail. And then you're going to have a decent number that's creating something of value that users really like and want to use. And they're going to stick around and they're going to be incredibly valuable. And so I think that's really all we're seeing is like a bunch of like early stage projects getting wiped out because most early stage projects do. And the ones who can last and build something valuable end up sticking around and being valuable. Yeah, I think we're gonna get out of it. I don't know if it ends up being this year or not, but I think macro ends up defining most of crypto. And no macro experts. Who the heck is a macro expert these days anyway? So I don't know what's going to happen, but like tokens will go back up, and after tons of them end up getting wiped out as well.
Marc, Polygon's doing a lot. We talked about Meta, Visa. You got the private stablecoin payments. As much as you can share, what can we expect on the roadmap in the coming months?
Yeah, I think a lot, like the past 6 months or so has really been executing on these acquisitions, integrating them internally, and really coming out with this single API that we've been talking about as the Open Money Stack API. that's something that we're about ready to release. And we've got a very large backlog of projects that are excited to go live on that API. And so over the next few months, it's going to be a flood of new projects going live on this API, and seeing a lot of partners talking about why, it is easy to use the open money stack, why they're excited about it, and why Polygon as a chain ends up being kind of their choice. So that's really it. And then I think when you fast forward a few months past that, you start hearing more about the enterprises that are going to be going live at scale. We've obviously seen that already with Meta and Visa, Modern Treasury. We're going to see a whole lot more of them actually leveraging the open money stack as they go live. So lots of fun stuff in the next few months.
That's exciting.
Marc, I know you don't like predictions, but Clarity Act, what do you think? You think this is going to be marked up in May? What are your thoughts?
Yes, because I think there's a lot of momentum, and I think the key thing holding it up is actually going to, I think, is mostly solved. I think the key issue for me ends up just being, frankly, like pure political stuff, and whether that gets in the way. But I think when we actually get to like the substance of it, I think we're actually in a pretty good spot now.
And just some wrap up questions. Going to do a little bit of rapid fire with you, just so our audience can get to kind of know you. First question: favorite food?
Ice cream.
Favorite musician band?
Oh, this is a weird one. I hate music. I have like no desire for music whatsoever. So I do not have a favorite musician or band.
Oh man. All right. Favorite movie?
Oh, this one's not going to be popular, but I love The Dark Knight, because the Joker in The Dark Knight is just so freaking legendary, and I will never forget it. I love it. There's lots of great movies, but I'll never forget that the Joker there. Just amazing.
Can't go wrong with The Dark Knight.
The opening scene, I mean, Heath Ledger in the school bus, that was just...
It's just crazy.
Yeah.
So good.
Favorite book?
It's a good one. So I random thing. I don't think I've read a book in 15 years now. I've never read like any kind of fiction. I don't care for fiction. And I think that nonfiction, you can consume the core content of books so much better in like blog form and other like short forms, such that like I don't read books anymore. But if I have to go back, honestly, I don't even have like a good answer. I'm just like not into books. But I will say, here, I'll give you an alternative. The thing that is most worthwhile for anybody to read is Naval's tweet on, I can't remember the exact term, but like how to become rich or something like that. That is the greatest single form, like piece of content that have ever existed for anybody. It's just like so good, because what it takes is, I think, a lot of people who live in like I'll call it like non-compounding world, and it brings you into a compounding world. This was actually like a big piece of like, it was actually Naval that like took me out of being like a lawyer. So I never I was always more of a business guy than a lawyer. But when I read that tweet from Naval, I was sitting there and I was a partner at a law firm. And all I could think is, wow, I am trading hours of my life for money. That is the most non-compounding thing you can ever do. Like, why am I not building something that can actually compound? And it's something that like intuitively I always like knew. Like, I come from a family of like entrepreneurs, but it never hit me until I read that tweet. And then I was like, WTF, this is crazy. So anyway, that tweet is the best. It's much better than any book. Just go read that tweet, Brett.
I love
second that. Sorry, Amanda. I love Naval, and I listen and watch a lot of his stuff. And yet that is one of my favorite pieces of his content. And he just gets you to think differently. It's incredible.
And lastly, favorite hobby?
I just like hanging out with my kids. Best thing for me is jumping in the pool with my kids and messing around. There's nothing more fun than that.
Beautiful. How old are your kids?
9 and 11, which is literally the perfect time for it.
Well, Marc, thank you so much for joining us. Super informative. Congratulations on all the success of Polygon, and we look forward to seeing a lot more.
Thanks so much for having me. This was a fun chat.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't as yet. If you're listening on a podcast platform such as Spotify or Apple, please follow and leave a 5-star rating. Thank you so much.